Euranet Plus Panorama is a weekly review of European news broadcast by our network of EU radio stations.
Hello there, welcome back to Euranet Plus Panorama. From this summer onwards, more than half of EU member states may be permitted to increase their debt in order to boost their defence spending. The Commission is currently reviewing 16 requests submitted en bloc on the 30th of April to activate the Stability and Growth Pact's so-called escape clause. The Rearm Europe plan, published in mid-March, set out a vision to rearm Europe that involves increased spending across the bloc. To achieve this, Brussels put forward several tools designed to enable EU member states to mobilise funds for the defence sector over the next 4 years. Among these is the escape clause. The measure in question is designed to allow member states to temporarily overspend without fear of sanction. Political scientist Ioannis Papafloritos, who teaches at a number of military colleges in Greece, gives our colleagues at Sky a succinct description of the mechanism.
Let's begin with the fact that the escape clause is not a new mechanism. Essentially, it's a tool provided by the European Union that allows member states to deviate from the Union's strict fiscal rules, but only in the case of exceptional circumstances that demand increased spending. Up to now, this mechanism has mostly been used during times of economic crisis and during the COVID pandemic. What's new is that it's now being proposed specifically for defence spending.
As EPP MEP Andrei Novakov told BNR in Strasbourg last week, in the context of a wider discussion about the EU budget, he's in favour of this mechanism, as it means that money will not have to be redirected from other important areas to fund an increase in defence spending.
The instrument that will finance defence in the EU is more of a debt instrument. I'm against money that was originally used for building schools, water pipes and roads being put towards missile launchers. Not because these are unimportant, but they are not the only thing that matters.
This additional defence spending would be capped at 1.5% of GDP per year over 4 years, a level that, according to the Commission, could release some 650 billion euros. Yet such a cap would be difficult to enforce when it comes to highly indebted nations that may feel the need to go beyond the 1.5% ceiling. And as Commission spokesperson Balázs Oivari explained at a press conference at the end of April, it does not give member states carte blanche to spend at will. There are strings attached.
If a member state is to activate the national escape clause, of course, on the one hand, it's going to give them more fiscal space to spend more on defense in this case, but this is to be reconciled with a disciplined fiscal policy. So it needs to be ensured that public debt remains sustainable, preferably on a downward trajectory, and that later on, following the 4-year period, because here we are talking about a period of 4 years between 2025 and 2029, the spending levels can be maintained by way of reprioritizing the budget.
While countries on the eastern flank welcome the move as a step towards greater flexibility, some Western European politicians warn of potential financial risks, rising interest rates, rapid debt accumulation, and even the risk of a repeat Greek-style debt crisis. While not going quite this far, Belgian PM Bart De Wever says that although he is seeking activation of the escape clause, he'll certainly be taking a cautious approach to it. RTBF shares his comments.
A little bit of accounting flexibility from Europe could be helpful, but we can't go overboard because money is money, and at the end of the day, someone has to pay. It would be irresponsible, given our budgetary situation, with a national debt that is far too high, for us to simply say, let's use 100% of the escape clause that Europe has provided.
Economist Marius Dubnikovas, Vice President of the Lithuanian Business Confederation, asserts that there's no reason to worry that more flexible borrowing for defence could lead to serious financial risks. On the contrary, he tells Žinių Radijas, Europe should use this as an opportunity to strengthen its economy.
If we look at the last 10 years, the United States has increased its gross domestic product by 50%. China by 70%, while the EU, or more precisely the Eurozone, only grew by 7%. That means that we're talking about complete stagnation, and these investments directed toward defence could act as a catalyst that, far from raising interest rates, actually revive the European economy by generating public orders that simply haven't existed until now.
On average, in 2023, EU member states' government expenditure on defence amounted to just 1.3% of GDP. This fell way short of NATO's target of at least 2%. Even in 2024, 7 member states came in below this NATO threshold: Belgium, Croatia, Italy, Luxembourg, Portugal, Slovenia and Spain. Several of these countries have recently committed to reaching the 2% mark by the end of this year, as opposed to several years down the track as previously forecast. Luxembourg, for one. The country's Prime Minister, Luc Frieden, tells 100.7 that peer pressure contributed to his government's change of heart.
You saw that Belgium, Slovenia and Italy, other countries in a similar position, have all recently announced that they will reach 2%. This means that we are under pressure from the NATO community. So this is what led us to this decision, as well as the conviction that we have to show solidarity by doing our bit to make sure that we can live in peace and freedom in Luxembourg.
Indeed, it would not look good for the EU country with the highest per capita wealth to be one of the only ones failing to do its bit. And Luxembourg obviously feels it has enough wriggle room to do so without the need for the escape clause. At the opposite end of the spectrum, 4 member states have even surpassed the 3% mark. In ascending order, Greece, Latvia, Estonia and Poland. All 4 of these countries have requested activation of the escape clause. You might be wondering, since their defence spending is already high, why they even need it. Well, Latvia, for instance, has expressed a desire to push for 5% in 2026, and will certainly require some flexibility in the system if it's to achieve this goal. And Ioannis Papafloratos, who opened this podcast, explains that the clause will offer Greece some much-needed slack.
In the past, especially during the years of the bailout programmes, we faced harsh criticism for spending too much on defence. As many ministers at the time explained, increasing defence spending for our country has never really been a political choice. It is essentially a geographical necessity. In other words, we have always been obliged to spend in order to defend ourselves and safeguard our sovereign rights. And now, countries in Western Europe, including those that used to be so critical of us, like Germany, are beginning to accept that such an escape clause is necessary. Of course, we'll have to see how this develops, because we are already considered to have exceeded the spending target for this year. Nevertheless, it will still provide fiscal flexibility. So for countries like Greece, which have already been accused of breaching budgetary limits, this mechanism is extremely important.
Even though many countries are still falling short by NATO's standards, almost all European countries increased their military spending in 2024, with some seeing unprecedented rises. Romania's military spending, for example, shot up by a staggering 43% last year. Poland saw a 31% hike, meaning that its defence spending now represents more than 4% of its GDP, far and away the highest level among EU member states today. And Germany's defence spending increased by 28% between 2023 and 2024, to reach almost 80 billion euros, making it the biggest spender in Europe in absolute terms, and the 4th biggest in the world after the US, China and Russia. This said, it's still only just about meeting NATO's 2% goal. Meanwhile, Germany's decision to reform its constitutional debt brake marks a major departure from its traditional fiscal policies. The radical reform permanently exempts military spending from borrowing limits. Speaking to his party on the subject of the compromises made to form his new coalition, new Chancellor Friedrich Merz defended his support for the change in policy, highlights AMS.
Und gerade beim Thema Schuldenbremse
When it came to the debt brake in particular, we had to stray a long way from our own position. I understand the disappointment of many voters in Germany all too well, but the situation in Europe, the risks of the transatlantic partnership and the danger of our country becoming politically incapable of action at this point of time left us with no other choice.
While this move does risk undermining EU-wide fiscal coordination, it also marks the most momentous shift in Berlin's attitude towards defence spending since the end of the Second World War. As Estonian President Ala Karis points out in an interview with Kuku Radio, times have certainly changed.
We can now see that Germany is prepared to invest much more in its defence than it was before. I spoke to President Steinmeier, who referred to his speech in Brussels. A poorly armed Germany is a greater threat to Europe than a strongly armed Germany. Europe seems to have got the message, but Germany itself needs a certain degree of proof and courage in order to contribute more to defence.
And it seems that it's getting braver fast. In breaking news, Berlin announced on Thursday that it had accepted Washington's request to up its defence spending to 5% of GDP by 2032. This would be along the lines of the compromise suggested by NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte last week. Essentially, what this means is 3.5% in direct military spending and 1.5% on defence-related infrastructure, such as reinforced bridges, which may, of course, be a handy workaround for countries, including Germany, with ailing infrastructure to update. In the meantime, the Commission has begun the process of assessing the 16 clause activation requests. In particular, it will be checking that a budgetary derogation is not likely to jeopardise a country's financial stability. The Brussels executive will then prepare recommendations for the Council, with a view to the latter body voting to activate, or not, the national escape clauses before the summer. Thanks for listening. We'll be back here again next week with another roundup of the news from around the EU, so make sure you tune in then.